Neon box office signs reflected in the wet pavement of a Broadway block at dusk. A line of adults in hats and overcoats stretched from the ticket window to the corner. Nobody spoke. Nobody left. The line held its shape like a single organism in the cold. 85 million Americans bought a movie ticket every single week in the 1930s. That figure ran against a national population of 130 million people. 1 in 4 Americans was out of work in 33, and 2 in 3 were at the movies. Beyond the ticket window stretched a lobby of marble columns and velvet rope barriers. Painted ceilings rose 40 feet above the crowd, pressing through the double glass doors. Fake stars lit the vaulted ceiling of the auditorium from above the last row to the first. A quarter bought 2 hours inside a palace built for people who owned nothing like it. The Depression was outside. The box office was open. The line moved forward. Studio lights burned across the MGM backlot at 3 in the morning without interruption. 40 sound stages ran simultaneously on the lot, each one sealed against outside noise. A Western Street set stood 30 feet from a Paris apartment facade on the same block. Between those two sets, a catering cart rolled past without slowing for either backdrop. 8 studios produced more than 400 films per year at the peak of the system. The 5 largest controlled production, distribution, and the theaters that showed the films. An actor under a 7-year studio contract had no legal right to refuse a role assignment. A director delivered the final cut to the studio and surrendered all further editorial control. Screenwriters worked in rows of offices that looked like the floors of an insurance company. Scripts moved from one writer to the next along a production chain nobody outside saw. A major studio released between 40 and 60 films per calendar year without stopping. That volume required every department, wardrobe, sets, lighting, sound, to run as one unit. Costume warehouses held 50,000 individual garments sorted by period and gender. Set construction crews built entire city blocks overnight and demolished them by morning. Prop storage ran across 2 full city blocks of shelving on the studio grounds. A contract document on the casting office desk ran to 40 pages of performance obligations. The obligations covered voice training, weight limits, and public appearance schedules. Publicity photographs of contract players went out to magazines before filming even began. Fan mail arrived at studio post rooms in canvas sacks sorted by the star's name on the bag. Outside the studio gates, the Depression measured itself in bread lines and closed storefronts. Inside the gates, the production schedule measured itself in shooting days and release dates. A film that lost money at the box office was replaced by the next one before the reviews ran. The machine did not pause for failure. It absorbed failure and kept the next film moving. Arc lights above a soundstage generated enough heat to wilt the painted canvas backdrops. Grease paint and hairspray mixed with the smell of hot electrical cable in every corridor. Extras in period costume ate lunch at folding tables between a Roman forum and a jungle set. The jungle set was 3 walls of painted plywood and a floor of sand brought in by truck. By 1936, Hollywood employed more than 30,000 people in production alone. 30,000 workers turning raw footage into a product released on a weekly schedule. The weekly schedule fed into a national network of 17,000 movie theaters. 17,000 venues waiting every Friday for the next package from the studio system. No other industry in the Depression years ran at full capacity and expanded simultaneously. The country was contracting. The Dream Factory was building new sound stages. Each new stage added capacity to a system that had not missed a single weekly release date. A marquee on a Tuesday afternoon listed 2 titles where one had appeared the year before. The line at the box office on a weekday ran longer than it had on any weekend in the 20s. 2 posters flanked the entrance doors. One for the main feature, one for the second. The second poster was smaller, and the star on it was unknown outside the trade papers. Double billing placed a major studio production alongside a low-budget Category B film. The Category B film cost less than $100,000 to produce from start to finish. It filled the program and kept audiences in their seats for 3 to 4 hours total. Theater owners adopted double billing because afternoon empty seats cost more than cheap films. A single admission covered both films and the newsreel and the coming attractions reel. Projectionists threaded the second reel while the first audience was still finding its seats. The reels arrived from the distributor in flat metal cans stacked in the projection booth. Each can was numbered, and each number corresponded to a specific place in the running order. A mislabeled can meant the second film ran before the first, and no one complained. In January, the auditorium temperature ran 20 degrees warmer than the street outside. Adults who had paid their quarter did not leave between the first film and the second. Some stayed through the second screening of the main feature and left only at closing. Ushers with flashlights moved along the rows after 10 o'clock and found occupied seats. The seats were occupied not by interest but by warmth and by nowhere else to go. Cardboard popcorn boxes accumulated on the floor beneath the seats across a double session. The smell of hot oil and salt settled into the velvet upholstery over years of use. By the second film, the air in the auditorium had thickened with breath and tobacco smoke. Ventilation fans in the ceiling ran at low speed and moved the air without clearing it. Studios producing Category B films shot an entire feature in 8 to 12 working days. The same standing sets rotated through multiple productions on back-to-back shooting weeks. A saloon interior built for one Western became a speakeasy for a crime film the next month. Dialogue was shot in sequence with no retakes beyond the technically necessary minimum. By 1938, more than half of all Hollywood productions were Category B films. More than 200 low-budget films entered distribution in a single calendar year. Each one was part of a package deal binding the theater to take the full studio output. A theater owner who wanted the top-billed feature took the supporting program with it. For the person who could afford one quarter, the double bill was an economic transaction. 2 films, a newsreel, and 4 hours of heated seating, all for the price of one ticket. The Depression had turned the movie theater into the most efficient shelter money could buy. The palace was built for spectacle. The Depression turned it into a utility, and the utility served 200 million visits every single week across the country. Before the feature began, the projector beam cut a white rectangle into the dark screen. A title card appeared, "This Week in the News," black letters on a pale gray field. The murmur in the auditorium dropped to silence in the space of 10 seconds. Popcorn boxes stopped moving. Nobody reached for a cigarette. The room held still. 5 newsreel companies produced weekly editions distributed alongside every feature film. Each edition ran between 5 and 10 minutes and covered 4 to 6 separate stories. The stories arrived at theaters on the same delivery truck as the main feature reels. A newsreel shot in Washington on Monday reached audiences in Kansas by the following Friday. Television existed by 35, but fewer than 1,000 sets were in private homes. Radio carried the voice of news, but carried no image of the event behind the voice. The newsreel was the only moving image of world events that most Americans ever saw. A flood in Ohio, a speech in Berlin, a championship fight in Madison Square Garden. All of it arrived on a strip of film threaded through the same projector as the comedies. The narration voice was male, clipped, and certain without qualification or pause. That voice described a Japanese warship launch and a county fair on the same recording. It described a breadline in Detroit and a tennis tournament in the same 2 minutes. The tone did not change between the breadline and the tournament. Certainty was the product. Combat footage from Spain arrived in newsreel packages 18 days after filming. The footage showed smoke and rubble and columns of figures moving through broken streets. No narration explained who had ordered the bombing. The smoke explained enough. Audiences who had never left their county watched a European city burn on a Tuesday afternoon. At the first sign of military footage, the auditorium shifted its posture without instruction. Backs straightened in the velvet seats. Hands moved off armrests and into laps. The newsreel was the one segment of the program that nobody talked through. It was also the segment that nobody left for the lobby concession stand during. In the projection booth, 2 reels ran on separate machines with a changeover between them. A cigarette burn in the upper corner of the frame signaled the projectionist to switch. The switch happened in 3 seconds and the image continued without a visible cut. Every person in the auditorium saw the burn signal and knew what it meant from repetition. After December 1941, the newsreel before the feature became something different. Pacific Fleet wreckage appeared on American screens within weeks of the attack. Government reviewers screened each newsreel before distribution and pulled certain images. The images pulled were the ones that showed the scale of the damage without qualification. What remained after the review still filled the auditorium with complete silence. The newsreel had begun as information. By 42, it had become the national nervous system. Laughter broke across the full auditorium without warning and without a single holdout. The screen showed a woman in evening dress sliding down a mudslide in a formal garden. The joke had cost the studio nothing extra. The laughter filled a house of 1,000 seats. Outside the theater, a breadline ran 2 blocks long in 31-degree cold. Hollywood in the 30s built its product around 6 genres engineered for maximum release. Musicals, screwball comedies, gangster films, westerns, horror, and melodrama ran in rotation. Each genre solved the same problem from a different angle. Give the audience 2 hours away. Musicals staged 100 performers in vast geometric formations on a single soundstage. The formations dissolved and reformed in overhead shots that turned bodies into patterns. Choreographer Busby Berkeley designed sequences that no theater stage could contain or stage. His camera moved through the formations from above, beside, and below the performers. The result was an image of abundance at a moment when abundance had ceased to exist outside. Rows of identical costumes, rows of identical gestures, rows of smiling identical faces. Screwball comedies ran their dialogue at a pace that left no pause for the audience to think. Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn exchanged 4 lines per second in the peak sequences. The speed was deliberate. A fast-moving screen left no gap for the depression to enter. At that pace, the film lasted 90 minutes and felt like 20. Nobody asked for a refund. Gangster films gave a man with nothing everything he wanted, inside 90 minutes. The ending was always bad. The censors required it, and the crowd had already decided. Between the start and the end, the screen showed money, cars, and authority without apology. The monsters on screen were fiction. The mortgage payment waiting at home was not. Western heroes rode into frame with nothing and rebuilt order before the final reel. The Western landscape had no breadlines in it. That was part of what made it useful. Melodramas gave women on screen the decisive power that the economy had stripped away. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford made decisions in their films that determined the outcome. Those decisions were made in apartments with good furniture and unrestricted wardrobes. The furniture and the wardrobes were the point. The screen showed what having looked like. In the dark auditorium, the screen filled the same field of view for every row of seats. The front row cost $0.25. The back row cost $0.25. The screen was identical for both. 2 hours of identical image was the most equal distribution the Depression ever managed. Clark Gable's face at 15 feet filled the visual field of every seat in the house. At that scale, a face became an environment and the audience lived inside it for 2 hours. The studios called it entertainment. The government called it morale. Both were correct. 85 million Americans a week chose the dark room over the lit street. The screen held. Photographs of contract players appeared in pharmacy windows before their films opened. The same face looked out from a theater lobby card, a magazine cover, and a soap advertisement. Each appearance was scheduled by the studio publicity department weeks in advance. The face was a product moving through distribution channels the way a film reel did. Every major studio maintained a publicity office with a staff of 30 or more writers. Writers produced approved answers the star then delivered to journalists as spontaneous speech. A biography released to fan magazines listed studio-approved details and omitted the rest. The omitted details covered prior marriages, political affiliations, and previous stage names. A star's public identity was produced jointly by the studio publicity office and the press. A 7-year studio contract gave the studio the right to loan the star to competing studios. It gave the studio the right to suspend the star without pay for refusing a role assignment. It gave the studio the right to approve or deny any public appearance outside studio events. The star received the salary and the fame. The studio retained the instrument producing both. Fan magazines functioned as the publicity arm of the studio system inside a glossy cover. The leading fan publication reached a circulation of 1.5 million copies per month. Its editors received early set access and production photographs in exchange for coverage. A negative story about a contract player required studio approval before it went to print. Clark Gable removed his shirt in a 1934 film and revealed no undershirt. Within months, undershirt sales at retailers across the country had dropped measurably. Underwear manufacturers tracked the sales decline and attributed it to that single scene. One actor's wardrobe choice in one scene created a measurable shift in a retail category. The star was not selling. The star was being observed. And the observation moved markets. Equipment depreciated. A star's box office value could increase with each successive release. Insurance policies on contract players covered illness, scandal, and physical injury. A broken arm on a leading player could delay a production by 6 weeks and cost the studio. Fan magazines sat in wire racks beside the ticket window at the box office entrance. A person waiting in line could read the cover story before buying the ticket to the film. The cover story was about the star in the film. The system was a single continuous loop. The Depression had made scarcity the dominant fact of daily life for most Americans. The star system offered the opposite, an image of abundance that renewed itself weekly. Not charity, not policy. A face on a screen that showed up every Friday without fail. On December 8, 1941, every studio production meeting began the same way. The question was not what to make next. The question was what the war needed made first. Government liaison officers arrived on studio lots within weeks of the Pearl Harbor attack. They carried guidelines, not suggestions. The distinction was understood by both sides. A Federal Information Office set up a Hollywood bureau and stationed reviewers on every lot. Those reviewers read scripts before shooting began and flagged content for revision. A film that showed American soldiers in a negative situation required justification in writing. A film showing the enemy as fully human required the same level of written justification. The Bureau returned notes. The studios revised. The cameras rolled on the revised version. Frank Capra received his orders directly from the Army Chief of Staff in Washington. His assignment was a documentary series explaining the war to the soldiers fighting it. The series ran to 7 films produced over 3 years on a military budget. Each film combined newsreel footage, animation, and narration into a single argument. Every serviceman in the United States military was required to watch the complete series. Casablanca went into production in 1942 before the script was fully finished. The war running outside the studio gates entered the film through its setting and its stakes. A story about a nightclub owner became a story about choosing a side when sides existed. Mrs. Miniver showed an English family absorbing aerial bombardment without losing its composure. American audiences watched that film in the same year that American cities ran blackout drills. The screen and the street were running on the same frequency for the first time. Theater lobbies ran war bond sales tables beside the popcorn counter during the war years. Ushers in uniform handed bond brochures to audiences moving toward the auditorium doors. Stars appeared in lobby photographs endorsing the bond purchase alongside the film poster. The purchase of a bond and the purchase of a ticket happened in the same 10-foot corridor. By 1943, more than 40 contract players had left for active military service. Their dressing rooms stood locked and labeled with the occupant's name still on the door. Studios replaced departing male leads with contract players from the supporting player pool. Female leads moved to the center of more productions than at any previous point in the decade. Younger men were absent from the seats in numbers visible from the back of any full house. The studio machine was built to manufacture consent to sit in a dark room and feel things. The war redirected that machinery toward a single output: consent to fight and consent to wait. Hollywood did not win the war. It kept 90 million people weekly pointed the same way. The studios owned the films, the theaters, and the contracts that tied them together. That ownership gave them control over the gate, the schedule, and the package on the screen. A theater owner who wanted one hit feature often had to accept a dozen weaker films with it. The system was called block booking. It moved whole bundles instead of single titles. In 1938, the federal government filed an antitrust case against Paramount. The case did not attack the films. It attacked the way the business moved those films. The complaint targeted theater ownership and the practice of forcing bundled bookings. Theater owners in smaller cities said the bundles left them no room to choose for themselves. They showed up in courtrooms with contracts stacked in boxes and booking sheets in hand. The case moved through hearings, appeals, and amended orders for almost 10 years. Every round of documents added another layer of delay to a model already under pressure. Meanwhile, the studios kept producing films and releasing them into their own theater chains. Law offices filled with paper towers and ashtrays became part of the studio infrastructure. The papers held booking clauses, delivery schedules, and theater lists by county. The effect was visible in every small-town auditorium that opened a studio package on Friday. A film had no independent life once the package system decided where it would appear. A package could include one major musical, 3 crime pictures, 2 comedies, and a western. If a theater wanted the musical, it accepted the rest of the package by contract. Theater schedules were filled months in advance by distribution departments in New York. The distribution departments decided what the audience could see before the audience arrived. The ruling said the studios had to sell the theaters they owned and stop block booking. The financial model that had powered the golden age lost its support in one sentence. The sentence landed in legal language. The effect was industrial and immediate. Studios began to unwind 7-year contracts, sell theater chains, and reduce output. The factory did not stop. It lost the machine that had guaranteed the audience. The palace lights stayed on, but the gatekeepers were no longer part of the same company. The number was roughly 90 million admissions every 7 days across the country. The next year, television sets began appearing in living rooms at a faster and faster rate. The pattern did not break overnight. It thinned first in the cities and then in the suburbs. Atmospheric theaters with painted stars and faux columns began closing one by one. The marble lobbies stayed in memory longer than they stayed in business and in use. The velvet seats were removed before the ceiling stars came down from the plaster. By 1950, the light in many American homes came from a smaller glowing screen. That screen sat on a cabinet and held the room in a different kind of darkness. Families no longer had to walk downtown to share the same film with strangers. The communal dark was replaced by living room light and separate viewing schedules. A projection booth in a closed palace still smelled faintly of hot dust and machine oil. The projector lens sat behind a shutter that had not opened in several years. The beam no longer cut the air above the seats, but the booth remained in place. Studios reduced their output and sold the certainty of weekly attendance for new uncertainty. The old 8-studio machine became a looser industry with fewer locked doors. The stars remained famous. The mechanism that made them universal had changed shape. The Golden Age taught the country how to sit together in the dark and accept a common story. It gave Depression-era America a shared language of jokes, stars, music, and escape. It gave wartime America a place to rehearse fear and patience before the news reached home. And it left behind a template that every later screen business still follows in pieces. Standard product, fixed schedule, shared room. The screen changed, but the logic stayed. What vanished was the palace. What stayed was the habit of gathering for light in the dark. The last reel did not end the habit. It only changed the room where the habit lived. Theaters that survived adapted their schedules, their bills, and eventually their screens. Television absorbed the weekday attention that the palace once held with a quarter. What remained was the expectation that stories arrive on a schedule and in sequence. Subscribe to American Echoes and step back into the lost streets, forgotten places, and timeless memories of vintage America.